The theme, and I guess kind of like the driving force of the show, is that I kind of came up with it as talking to like other artists, and kind of like just other people in my life, realizing that like we've all kind of been kind of suppressed in like how we can show our affection. We can't really be close to people. We can't really, go up and just hug people that we haven't seen in a long time. There's still kind of this weird space between people. And I think it's kind of all made us like really vulnerable and kind of isolated in that like not being able to express ourselves and express our love, and kind of like being able to like connect with people has been really hindered because of COVID and because of quarantine. And even as things start to let up, and it's still kind of budgeting, like who am I allowed to be close to, who is being as careful as me, how do you open those conversations, and it's kind of like we're all walking on eggshells trying to figure out how to actually like be a person and connect with other people. And I think this show really is a culmination of all of those feelings in different ways. Different artists kind of have gone through different things, and are kind of expressing themselves. And I think really where the title and where the theme comes from, the Tender Hearts Club, is like a celebration of that, because artists are able to express those really complicated feelings through our work, and being able to work through those feelings and create work that other people can connect with, is really important, and kind of like is the role of artists. And especially as we're all kind of dealing with the same thing, it's really important that we share our work and share our feelings, because of how suppressed it's felt. Especially because of COVID, we've all been very careful about who we're around and kind of who we're connected to and who we want in our lives. And I think through this show, we kind of see different artists' takes on that, like who we want to be connected to, who we want to be around, who we're missing, and kind of the complexities of intimacy and closeness because of COVID. Of course, love and connection are so complex, and I think that each artist has kind of their own expression of that. Like an example piece is by Shea Gladowski, which is about touch starvation and the inability to be close to people, the inability to be around them and build those physical connections. So I think there's certainly expressions of pain and frustration. Same with my pieces, Playground 1 and Playground 2, kind of being done with this, being done with being separate, and being frustrated at those separations. So I think that a lot of the work kind of shows those complexities and those negativities. There's certainly a duality in the whole exhibition, that there are some really beautiful moments and beautiful sides of love and connection, but also this frustration and separation that has been really hurting people and making them frustrated. And I think a lot of the artists kind of have their own ways of expressing those complexities, whether it's leaning into the optimism that eventually we'll be able to see each other, or just kind of wanting to get their feelings out, and say it does suck and it is frustrating and you want to be around people. I think that a lot of the work does lean towards hope. I think a lot of the work has been created as personal comfort, especially some of the pieces that have kind of been made during quarantine and during those isolated moments. And I think we all want to hope for a point that we can be with each other again, and that we can not worry about those things like closeness, and we can just celebrate each other. So I think that there is an optimistic tone in a lot of the pieces. There is certainly a really wide range of different media, from mixed mediums, like collage and acrylic and ceramic. And I think that it really shows the broad range of artists that are kind of selected, and the broad range of people that are kind of experiencing the same thing. And that was certainly something that I like as I started to reach out to different artists, I realized that so many people were thinking about this theme, that this idea of intimacy and closeness was kind of on everyone's mind, and came to a really nice array of work from a really diverse group of artists. So when I started to collect the different artists and really look for who was going to be a part of the show, I realized that even in kind of casual conversations like, oh, this is the exhibit that I'm curating, people were like, oh, I have a piece that's exactly about that. And I realized like it really came forward how prevalent this idea was. And I mean, even just like the great diversity of artists, you know, myself and Shay Gladowski are young college students, versus, you know, other artists who are slightly older, or professional artists, or, you know, instructors, and kind of like a broad array of people just all having the same feelings. So I sort of selected people that really resonated, and that even some of the pieces I did have in mind ahead of time, some, you know, the artist came to me and just said, you know, I'd love to be in this show. This is, you know, the piece. So it was really exciting to see everything collected. And because of COVID, this was a show kind of planned online, and through email and kind of done digitally. So there's certainly something really interesting about finally seeing all the work together and realizing that, you know, we're all artists, we're all feeling the same things, and can kind of see that in the show.
It was a little bit of a journey for me to decide what to enter, because my work usually has an environmental theme, and nothing that I already had made would fit with the theme of the show. So I thought a lot about how I could interpret this, and I've been thinking a lot about the last 2 years with COVID, and what I learned from that. There was a lot of a sense of isolation. I remember especially early in the pandemic where, you know, friends of mine couldn't visit their parents in the nursing home. It was just, I mean, it was really an extreme that I think we forget sometimes now. So I wanted to build on that. And I started by painting a picture of someone that I thought was really suffering from the isolation of being stuck indoors alone. But I wanted to tell the other half of the story. And I normally work in clay, so I made a pair of hands out of clay to represent the touch that I think we all long for when we're feeling that isolated. So I made a pair of hands that are about, well, maybe 10 inches long, 9 or 10 inches long, maybe 6 inches high. I hand sculpted them out of earthenware clay a couple of times through the kiln, and ended up with this kind of interesting, I think organic looking sculpture of a pair of hands just touching each other. You know, it was all about that touch. I kind of dabbled in sculpture a little bit before. I actually started as a painter, so the painting part was very comfortable for me. Sculpting a pair of hands was a little bit of a new experience. You know, I remember back when I was in college and I was studying drawing and painting, I couldn't handle people. And I forced myself to take a life drawing class because I felt like I had to learn how to handle people. And I think with sculpture, that's where I'm at now, is sculpting people is just as intimidating to me as drawing people used to be many years ago. And I've been thinking for the last couple of years that it was time to take on human sculpture, so this was a good step in that direction. It's a piece of me. I'll say it's a piece of me. It's a lot of what I've been seeing and feeling the last couple of years, and something that I really haven't expressed in my art before. So this was a good change. It's much more personal. Yeah, I said most of my ceramic work is environmental themed, but I have digressed into people. I've done pieces that are tributes to family members that aren't here anymore, or just strong women that I admire. I've done a whole series of work with that. But again, it's just painting on a 3-dimensional ceramic canvas. But this was different, so this was fun. It was good. I think that I really felt the need to express my feelings about COVID, and how that impacted me and how that impacted people around me. And yeah, I could have done a lot of different paintings of people that express touch in a different way. But COVID is a topic where I felt like what I've been feeling needed to be said by me. I needed to say something about it. I think it's more painful than most of the other work in the show. Most of the work in the show is what I think of as stereotypical love, heart, compassion, human interaction. And this hits on the painful side of it. So it's different in that respect.
Yeah, so I actually heard from Dolores, who's an old friend, and I had shown here before. I had a solo show in, I think it was 2017, and she was just reaching out. I get emails often, but I've been so busy and super distracted. But this particular one, she reached out a second time, so I thought, oh, I better hear what Dolores has to say. And the subject was tender hearts, and I thought, oh, well, I'm interested because I love hearts as a motif. It's super traditional in Pennsylvania Dutch folk art to use hearts, but also just a motif that I've loved since I was a kid, just completely obsessed with it. So my interest was piqued, and then I read the curatorial statement, and I had to catch my breath because it was just profoundly relatable to my experience in the last, I guess it's like 2 years, but it feels like 400. So the COVID experience has been very isolating for myself and my family. We're high risk, and we've basically stayed isolated up until I started working full time, and then that actually exposed me to COVID. So it's been a tough time for us. So it definitely was palpably inspirational to me that the show was about tender hearts and the whole idea of the show. So I felt really connected right away. So I consider myself now at 41 a Pennsylvania Dutch folk artist. I call myself a contemporary Pennsylvania Dutch folk artist. And what I mean by that is that I'm working within the folk that are currently alive and within the time frame that we're currently alive, but using traditional arts and motifs in this contemporary time. So what that means is that rather than kind of reenacting these different processes that people were using 300 years ago, I'm using new tools and things that we have available now, including digital options as well. I use a lot of digital photography and digital techniques in my work. But the reason that I am a Pennsylvania Dutch folk artist is that I was looking about 10 years ago very deeply for a connectedness to my roots, and really searching very very hungry and thirsty for that. And I had been a trained artist and a fine artist and done a lot of fine art processes where I was trying to explore who I was as a person, but never had this deeper connection to really who I was. So through art and through Pennsylvania Dutch folk art, I did find that connectedness. And so it's something that is almost, I always talk about it like it's a ritual, but also a way of worship for myself and who I am, and just reconnecting to my roots, constantly recycling that feeling of reconnectedness through the artwork, which is really incredible and in a way like art therapy. But what happened to me during this time of COVID is the work that I made previous to developing my aesthetic in Pennsylvania Dutch folk art was kind of darker and more self-exploratory, trying to find out who I was and exploring ideas of self-love and self-hate and self-doubt. And then when I discovered my voice in Pennsylvania Dutch folk art, it felt like a light, and it was very light and bright and inspiring and like a renaissance within myself, and I felt really connected to it. But then during COVID, personally, it was a huge struggle for me, and I went to a really, really dark place, being isolated and anxious and in panic, basically, how to protect myself and my family. So even though I still was working within Pennsylvania Dutch folk art themes, the work definitely symbolized something differently to me, particularly, maybe not to my audience, but it was definitely a dark time, and still I'm just kind of coming out of it now. But it's interesting to look at the art throughout the years and during this time, how it changed and how it ebbed and flowed. And I wonder if my audience picked up on that. So it's kind of interesting, and maybe something I can ask them about after this show is opened, and it would be kind of interesting to have conversations about that. Okay, so I have two pieces in this show, and the one behind us, I think, that's called the Big Mama Hex, and it's a funny play on words. I didn't come up with this design during the COVID era, but I did right before the COVID era. And what it is it's a play on words, because in Pennsylvania Dutch folk art and hexine specifically, a man named Johnny Ott, a wonderful hexine painter, designed something called the Big Daddy Hex, and it's a really popular theme. And I thought it was really fun because there's really not many female hexine painters, and I felt, you know, if there's a Big Daddy Hex, there should be a Big Mama Hex. So I took a couple different motifs from a woman named Frances Licton, who was a Pennsylvania Dutch scholar in mid-century, and she made these wonderful workbooks where she would actually show you different motifs from all these different places, like furniture and butter molds, but she would make sketches of them so you could then take it as a template and use it yourself, which I think is wonderful. As an art teacher, I love that idea. So I took a couple of her different themes and kind of mashed them together and figured out how they looked nice together, and that's where this came from. And then the other piece is 3 hearts, and they, again, I love hearts. Very, very important motif in Pennsylvania Dutch Fraktur, and they were inspired as well by different motifs that I've seen on things like, I think some of them were in the Frances Licton book as well, and from pottery and things like that. And I just love everything in 3s, because 3's the charm, and it just feels very magical. So I usually do these little shape paintings, and they're just little hearts, but this was also in reclaimed wood and had the 3 together, and then my husband made this really lovely frame for it. So it's a very special piece to me too. And I have 3 kids, so 3 is everything.
Dolores invited me, I guess because she'd seen some of my work and felt that I was kind of doing things in that kind of it. My work has always been about people and relationships, so it kind of fits into the theme anyway. I thought it was a great theme because obviously this pandemic thing has affected everybody, not just in Berks County or the country, but in the whole world. So I thought it was a great theme to kind of explore what sort of feelings and what sort of emotions that the whole different issues we've had with this have brought about. I think that one of the things that art does really well is explore issues and ideas and themes, and so I thought it was a great theme to do a show around. I can't say it's affected my ability to create art because obviously, as mostly doing paintings, I work fairly solitary, but it has definitely very much affected my life and my interactions. Being older, first of all, I was in a high-risk category. But also about in the middle of the pandemic, I retired from my job teaching at Albright. Partly, I had been thinking about retiring, but I partly retired because of the pandemic. It kind of felt like I was putting myself in danger for, already as an older person with, less of an immune system, I would get sick every year from the kids because they're coming in from all over the country with germs that aren't local, that haven't been exposed to. And I always got a flu shot. I have for 10 years now. But yet it started out once a year I would get the flu or some kind of viral thing. And then it started out like every semester I would get it. And then when it went, we went virtual at Albright. And teaching virtually is very, very hard. Not because of the technical aspect of it, because, I made video. I did 10 times more work. I made demos of videos. And I'm teaching, a lot of what I was teaching was the Adobe Creative Suite. So I'm teaching computer stuff. So being on the computer virtually, that wasn't really that limiting. But the thing that made it so difficult was I had no way of knowing if I was engaging the students. You know, you see, they turn off their cameras. You know, all kinds of legal things. You can't force them to have their camera on. You don't even know if they're there. Whereas before, when you're in the classroom, you walk around, you can see who's struggling, you can see who needs your help, you can see who's trying to hide, you can see who you need to kind of draw back in. Virtually, I felt like I did 10 times the work and was only half as effective as I used to be. And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, you know, like I'm almost 70. Like why am I putting myself in danger and struggling so hard and doing this? And plus, you know, my daughter's a teacher in Cheltenham, and she was having babysitting issues because, you know, with her kids being too young to be vaccinated, she didn't want to put them in daycare, and so I thought, you know, I think my time and my energies are better served in like taking care of my grandkids, making that, you know, establishing that close connection, rather than struggling to be out in a fairly dangerous world doing a job that was difficult and wasn't even as rewarding as it used to be. So yeah, I retired, and then I watched my grandkids 3 days a week, and that's been wonderful. It's been so joyful. But the thing is, because I'm watching them 3 days a week and they aren't vaccinated, I had to still be super careful who I'm around and what I do. So yeah, it's affecting me longer than it probably would have. And I'm also a very social person. Like my artwork's always been about people and relationships. Relationships are extremely important to me. One of my friends told me that I had a business doing graphic arts for many, many years, and she worked for me. And she said, you know, the thing about you is that what you do is, like, all of your clients become your friends, and like your biggest talent and skill, like your goal in life, is to connect people. Like this person needs that. Oh, this person does that. Let's introduce them. And you know, you sort of like are the grease that makes, like, you know, relationship happen. And all that went away with COVID. So that was very, very hard for me. And at one point, my husband, who is like a hermit, like he loves staying home. I had to convince him to, you know, drag him out anywhere. We were talking to someone. He goes, "Oh yeah, our life really hasn't changed. It's the same. It doesn't make." I said, "Oh no, your life hasn't changed. You are so happy to have an excuse to not go anywhere. My life has gone down the toilet." You know. Well, the one piece I did for the show, the piece in the other room, I Give You My Heart. That one I did, and actually it's probably the fastest I ever painted anything. I think I painted it in 2.5 days. I mean, not continuous, but you know. Usually I start something, I put it aside, I work on it, but that I actually just sat down and painted. And that I felt like, it actually came from a piece I did in a sketchbook when I was taking a class at Kutztown about a year or two ago. And I think it had to do with, we were supposed to do something that had to do with another artist's work, and that artist was doing these, like, I forget who the artist even was doing these like rounded, I don't know if they were metal or what, hearts. And it just, like, I don't know, some song was going through my mind, like, "Last Christmas I Gave You My Heart." And I just like did this little sketch of this person handing this round plastic or heart over. And then when I was approached about doing this show, I thought, well, you know, that's one thing that has happened a lot during this pandemic. People are really offering, like with me, with the grandkids, like doing things that are closer and really, like, you know, I give you my heart, like really connections become more important. So that's what inspired that one. This one I had done probably 2 years ago. And this one, actually, the person in it is Molly Crabapple. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. She's young. She's the same age as my daughter, which means she's under 40. And she's just an amazing human being. She is an art school dropout. She has a very high level of involvement. She's I guess you'd call her a journalist artist or artist journalist. She travels around. She lives in New York City, but she travels around the world, mainly more often to the Middle East than anywhere else. Just journaling. She writes articles. She mostly illustrates them. She's published several books already. she has a very strong, she was involved in that Occupy Wall Street. She did a series on the prisoners in Guantanamo Bay. She's just very involved, very active. I just really, really admire her. So that's what, it was just kind of a piece honoring her. And I think I was into painting women with tattoos. She doesn't have a tattoo, I think, you know, it's kind of, and she doesn't have a child either. It just, and it was also when I was doing a series of artwork kind of based somewhat on religious icons. So that's where that came about. A lot of times when I do a piece, like I don't in my mind say, oh, I'm going to do this piece because it's going to mean that, and I'll put this symbolism into it. I just have something that inspires me. I start sketching or I start painting, and then things just start sort of popping into it. And then in the end, my pieces always are very narrative, but the narration kind of comes on its own. Like I don't decide what it's going to say. It kind of happens as I'm working on it, you know.